Joran trudged across the violet grass, each step sinking slightly into the soft, almost liquid surface and cursed under his breath. Twin suns had turned the sky into a molten gradient, one eye squinting at the glare, the other tracking a distant shimmer near a jagged ridge. It looked like a body, someone, or something, sitting against the rocks, and instinct told him that even in this uncharted sector, curiosity outweighed caution. He'd read enough manuals to know that approaching unknown life could get him disintegrated, abducted, or politely ignored in alien bureaucracy, but the figure's posture pulled at something he hadn't had time to name. Vulnerability, maybe, though he immediately chastised himself. Humans were terrible judges of alien vulnerability. The closer he got, the more he realized she wasn't what he expected. At first glance, she resembled a human woman, slender, elegant, curled slightly as though she'd fallen. Her skin shimmered faintly in the shifting light, a soft gold with threads of lavender that seemed to ripple like silk in the breeze. The most striking feature was her ears, long, tapering, delicately arched, twitching slightly as she tilted her head. They reminded him, absurdly, of some elf he'd once seen in a holovid, except these ears had a subtle intelligence, like they were listening to things humans couldn't hear. And her eyes, deep, dark, endless pools that seemed to fold the landscape inside them, made him falter, stepping awkwardly on the grass as he tried to decide if she was awake, aware, or possibly dangerous. He cleared his throat, which sounded surprisingly loud against the hum of the nearby crystalline rocks. Hello." His voice cracked on the last syllable. Silence answered, save for the faint, vibrating hum of the ground beneath them. He took another step and nearly tripped over a stray root-like protrusion, cursing again under his breath. She didn't move immediately, but then she did something that made him freeze entirely. She laughed. Not the startled, nervous laugh he had expected, but a full-bodied, musical laugh that reverberated in the air like it had its own gravity. You're not hurt," he ventured, shifting from one foot to the other. She rolled onto her back, flinging her arms in an exaggerated motion and kicking her long legs skyward. "Hurt," she said in a tone that seemed to vibrate in sync with the ground, though it didn't sound threatening. "Me? Oh no. That would be boring." Her voice was light, teasing, and entirely incomprehensible until his translator hiccuped and turned the musical vibrations into a string of polite exclamations and apologies. He blinked. "Right, boring. Yes. Of course." As he stepped closer, trying to seem cautious rather than clumsy, she squinted at him with a smile that made her ears twitch in a way that could almost be considered flirtatious, or maybe mischievous. "You humans," she said, the translator mangling it into something like, "Greetings, awkward bipedal observer." Joran coughed, embarrassed, imagining her rolling her eyes at him, which, judging by her posture, wasn't impossible. "Look, I just thought you might need help or—" He stumbled over the words, suddenly aware of how ridiculous he probably looked standing there with his field pack sagging, and one boot coated in violet dust. She sat up abruptly, hair catching the light, long ears flicking in what looked exactly like exasperation, and tilted her head. "Need help," she repeated, in a way that sounded both amused and curious. "Do you often offer help to everyone you see sitting on the ground?" He opened his mouth to answer and closed it again. He did often try to help people, though never with this level of interspecies confusion. "Well, yes," he offered weakly. Mostly, she repeated, laughing again, this time letting out a sound that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end in the best possible way. She shifted, leaning back on her hands, her long ears quivering like antennae detecting invisible frequencies. "You're funny," she said, or at least the translator rendered it as that. Joran felt a blush rise, though whether from embarrassment or the faint magnetic pulse emanating from the nearby rocks, he couldn't tell. Trying to recover his dignity, he crouched slightly, as if that made him look less threatening. "I can be serious too," he said, though the words sounded flat even to him. She tilted her head again, eyes glittering with some inner amusement or puzzle, and tapped the ground with a long, graceful finger. The violet soil responded, emitting tiny sparks of light with each contact, and he realized that she had some sort of influence over the environment, or perhaps the environment simply liked her. "I believe you," she said, voice laced with mischief. Then, without warning, she sprang to her feet and spun in a perfect pirouette, making Joran stumble back in surprise. "Mostly funny, mostly helpful, mostly human," she said, her long ears flaring out like banners. "I will remember you mostly." He laughed nervously, trying not to stare at the way her movements seemed both delicate and unnervingly precise. "Mostly remembered is good, I think." "Mostly," she confirmed with a grin that made her eyes shimmer. Then she paused, looking at him seriously for the first time. "But you will need more than mostly to survive here, human." And just like that, the lesson sank in. Joran realized that what he had assumed about her, fragile, vulnerable, perhaps even scared, was entirely wrong. She was playful, clever, and completely unpredictable. The moment stretched between them, neither entirely threatening nor safe, charged with curiosity, laughter, and the faint hum of alien energy vibrating in the violet grass. "I'm Joran," he said finally, offering his hand. She regarded it for a heartbeat and then, impossibly, tapped it with one finger, making a small spark jump from the tip to his skin. He yelped. "Hey." "Mostly harmless," she said with a chuckle, stepping back. Her long ears flicked like a conductor, signaling a symphony only she could hear. And Joran realized, with equal parts dread and delight, that he had no idea what had just begun. The wind shifted, carrying the smell of distant minerals, and the twin suns caught the shimmer of her skin. She looked like a human in almost every way, but only almost, and that tiny difference was enough to turn his entire understanding of alien encounters upside down. And yet, against all odds, he smiled. Mostly. Joran woke to the faint hum of the violet grass, still tingling from the spark she had sent up his arm the night before. He blinked, squinting at the alien horizon as if the twin suns themselves were conspiring to confuse him, and found her sitting cross-legged a few meters away, ears twitching in perfect synchrony with the gentle vibrations around them. She had tilted her head, eyes like liquid night reflecting light in patterns he couldn't comprehend. Her hands traced abstract symbols in the air, leaving trails of faint luminescence that lingered for a few heartbeats before fading, and Joran realized with a sudden jolt of awe that she was communicating without speaking. Or maybe she was speaking, and the air itself translated her thoughts into patterns he could see but not entirely understand. "Good morning, mostly human," she said finally, her voice flickering through his translator like static, leaving behind fragmented words, half jokes, half observations. "You slept in a weird human way, legs flailing, interesting." Joran groaned, rubbing his shoulder. "Mostly interesting, mostly acceptable." He tried to straighten his pride, failing miserably. "I didn't fall off the planet." "That counts for something, right?" She tilted her head and her long ears twitched. "Mostly counts. Mostly." She jumped to her feet suddenly, her movement fluid, defying the subtle pull of gravity in ways that made Joran stumble backward again. "You must learn quickly, mostly human, or the planet will notice your clumsiness and intervene." "Intervene?" he echoed, heart leaping. "Yes," she said with a grin, "not violently, well, not usually. The plants sometimes correct humans, you'll see." She waved a hand, and a nearby stalk of violet grass shivered violently, bouncing like a coiled spring. Joran almost yelped as a small glowing seed shot toward him. She clapped once, delighted. "See, mostly harmless correction." Joran caught the seed, looking at it like it had just insulted his mother. "Mostly harmless." That bounced like a proton cannon. "Mostly probable cannon," she amended, with a flourish of her hands that made tiny sparks dance in the air. Her ears flicked like radar, and the sparks seemed to follow her rhythm, creating a chaotic light show that made him laugh despite himself. "You humans are so dramatic, mostly amusing." He gave her a wary glance. "Mostly amusing, mostly dangerous. What's the ratio?" She laughed, that same musical, vibrating sound that still made him catch his breath. Mostly unpredictable, mostly delightful, mostly enough to keep you alive if you pay attention. As the morning stretched, she guided him across jagged ridges and crystalline outcrops that hummed with energy he could feel in his bones. Every step required awareness. Rocks that seemed solid would ripple under pressure, emitting sparks or strange flashes, or plants that reacted with curious intelligence. Joran tripped more than he liked to admit, and each time she laughed, her long ears flicking in exaggerated amusement. When he finally admitted defeat and plopped onto a luminous ridge, she perched beside him, legs folded, ears brushing the shimmering air. "Mostly human," she said. "You are better at falling than I expected. Mostly." "I'll take that as a compliment," he muttered, though he noticed her smirk. Their communication grew, a dance of partial telepathy, gestures, and translator glitches that produced accidental comedy. At one point, Joran tried to ask her about the creatures flitting around her. The tiny, hovering things that resembled jellyfish in midair, but shimmered like liquid metal. The translator, as always, faltered, rendering her response into something like, "Tiny friends, mostly observant, occasionally judgmental." Joran snorted. "Judgmental? You have judgmental jellyfish." "Yes," she said, nodding, one ear twitching. "Mostly polite, mostly critical, mostly indifferent to humans who can't hover." She gestured, and the creatures swarmed him playfully, brushing his arms and making him jump. She laughed, more at his reaction than the creatures themselves. "Mostly harmless," she repeated, voice twinkling. As the day deepened, she revealed glimpses of her world, traces of ancient structures buried beneath the luminous plains, faint, geometric designs in the air, and a low, resonant vibration that seemed to hum with intelligence. Joran asked questions, careful ones this time, and she answered in ways that made him chuckle or stumble. The humor was never cruel. It was teasing, and observational, like the planet itself had a sense of irony. She pointed out his habit of blinking too often under twin suns, his tendency to panic when a plant twitched too close, and the absurdity of him trying to appear competent while every microbe, crystal, and light particle seemed to mock him silently. At one point, she led him to a small plateau where the ground pulsed slightly beneath them. She crouched and traced patterns with her fingertips, which made tiny lights rise and form shifting constellations above. "Mostly storytelling," she said. "Mostly truthful, mostly entertaining." Joran stared, mouth slightly open. "Mostly truthful." "Mostly?" She tapped the air and a figure formed, shimmering, like a projection but alive in some sense. It resembled a human mostly, but elongated, ears flaring, limbs stretched, dancing in impossible angles. "Mostly accurate," she added, eyes glinting. He laughed despite himself. "Mostly terrifying." She laughed louder. "Mostly. You are learning, mostly human, mostly." By evening, Joran realized he had become strangely attuned to the rhythms of this alien place and its inhabitant. Every twitch of her long ears, every flicker of her fingers, every musical vibration carried information he could almost read. Humor had been the bridge, her amusement at his clumsiness, the occasional pun of the translator, the judgmental jellyfish, making the alien less alien and him less fearful. As twin suns dipped behind jagged ridges, she turned to him, tilting her head like a question. "You are mostly attentive. Mostly. Tomorrow we will see if you can keep up when the ground decides it is in charge. Mostly survival, mostly fun, mostly enlightening." He groaned but laughed anyway. "Mostly prepared, mostly exhausted, mostly whatever, sure." Her laughter filled the air again, long and resonant, and Joran realized something he hadn't expected. He was not just learning about her, or this world, or the strange creatures. He was learning to shed his expectations, to embrace the chaos, to laugh at himself while the planet watched and tested him in ways no human instruction manual had ever prepared him for. Mostly, he thought, I might survive. Mostly. Joran woke to the familiar hum of the violet plains, a sound that no longer unnerved him but felt like a pulse syncing with his own heartbeat. Liara was already awake, standing a few meters away with her long ears flicking in a rhythm he had come to understand as amusement. "Mostly awake, mostly human," she said, tilting her head. "Today, the planet decides we are serious." "Mostly ready," he muttered, adjusting the straps of his pack and trying to appear competent, which, after 2 days of practice, was mostly true. The task ahead was clear. Liara had spoken of a rare energy crystal buried in the jagged ridges, a crystal that pulsed with resonance strong enough to interfere with the delicate balance of the local flora and fauna. It wasn't just about retrieving it. It was about navigating a landscape that seemed alive, unpredictable, and occasionally fond of teasing trespassers. They set off, moving carefully along ridges that hummed and shimmered with latent energy. Joran noticed that the small, hovering jellyfish-like creatures followed them again, circling him as if curious whether he had finally learned to survive. "Mostly polite," Liara reminded him, flicking her long ears in an exaggerated gesture. "Mostly curious, mostly judgmental of your last attempt at balance." He waved at them nervously, "Mostly trying not to get zapped by the planet today, mostly." She laughed, the sound rippling through the air, vibrating faintly in resonance with the crystals beneath their feet. "Mostly acceptable," she said, "mostly." As they climbed higher, the terrain grew increasingly strange. Crystalline spires erupted from the ground at odd angles, casting fractured light across the ridges. Occasionally, the soil pulsed beneath Joran's boots, making him stumble, and each time he tripped, Liara's laughter followed him like a playful echo. He had learned to move more carefully, to anticipate the environment, and yet the planet's mischief ensured that no moment of hubris went unchallenged. "Mostly learned," he said once he had regained his balance. "Mostly," she confirmed, clapping her hands, which sent tiny sparks scattering into the air. "Mostly human, mostly useful." Eventually, they arrived at the location of the energy crystal. It lay in a shallow basin, surrounded by jagged metallic growths that pulsed in time with the crystal itself. Joran felt the resonance immediately, a vibration in his chest that made him breathe a little more carefully. The crystal's surface shimmered like liquid light, and he had to resist the urge to reach out immediately. Liara crouched beside it, tracing patterns in the air. The patterns resonated with the crystal, causing it to emit faint arcs of energy that danced across the surface, harmless but mesmerizing. "You may try," she said, flicking her ears toward him. "Mostly delicate, mostly requires balance, mostly safe if you are mostly careful." Joran approached, hand outstretched, and paused, recalling the lessons of the past days. To shed assumptions, to observe, to respect the strange rhythm of this world. His hand hovered above the crystal, and with a deep breath, he allowed his movements to sync with its pulsing energy. The crystal responded immediately, sending arcs of gentle light up his arm and across his vision. He didn't panic, didn't stumble, didn't fail. He adapted, learned, and acted with the patience and curiosity that Liara had nurtured in him. Liara's eyes shone as she watched him, her long ears flicking in approval. "Mostly capable, mostly attentive, mostly human," she said, her voice carrying amusement, pride, and something like warmth. "Mostly." As they worked together to stabilize the crystal, a sudden surge of energy rippled through the basin. Metallic growths shifted, reacting to the crystal's manipulation. Joran froze briefly, but Liara's hands and gestures guided him seamlessly, and the two of them moved in synchrony, laughing quietly at the absurdity of their coordinated improvisation. The surge passed, leaving the crystal stable and pulsing in harmony with the environment. "Mostly intact," Liara said, jumping onto a nearby spire, letting her long ears trail dramatically behind her. "Mostly human, mostly competent, mostly amusing." Joran laughed, finally able to embrace the humor in the chaos. "Mostly relieved," he admitted. The return journey was lighter, filled with playful banter and shared observation. Joran noticed details he had missed before. Tiny creatures dancing in the air, plants that flickered as if in private jokes, the subtle ways the light refracted through the crystalline ridges. Liara commented on his improved coordination, the way he now anticipated the planet's quirks, and even teased him for his still clumsy, mostly human gestures. He realized he didn't mind being the subject of her amusement. It had become part of the rhythm between them. By the time they reached the edge of the plains, the twin suns were dipping low, casting long, molten shadows. Liara stopped, turning to him. "Mostly human," she said seriously for the first time in hours. "You have learned mostly well, mostly observant, mostly careful, mostly alive." "I've mostly learned from you," he replied. "Mostly." She laughed, a soft vibration in the air, and stepped closer, ears flicking in a subtle display of affection. "Mostly correct, mostly fun, mostly enough for both of us to survive this planet and each other." Joran nodded, feeling the weight and wonder of the journey settle into him. He realized that he had changed, not just in skill or survival, but in understanding, patience, and perspective. He had shed the assumptions he had brought from humanity, learned to laugh at his mistakes, and embraced the unpredictable rhythm of a